the water is the one that keeps you and me and everything on the land alive.
Tonight, a long wait. First Nations and the Yukon territorial government ink a deal to protect a sensitive and pristine area of the territory.
3, 2, 1.
And a Mohawk community gets its first regulation baseball field thanks to the Blue Jays.
Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. It's been a long battle, but last week Yukoners gathered to witness a moment many have waited for, the signing of the Peel Watershed Regional Land Use Plan. APTN's Chris McIntyre has more.
It's been over 15 years of consultations, protests, and court battles. The Peel Watershed Agreement has finally been signed. Nacho Nayak elder Jimmy Johnny, a well-respected outfitter in the territory, says it's about time.
Really think about the water. The reason why I'm saying this is because the water is the one that keeps you and me and everything on the land alive.
5 governments, the Nacho Nayak Trondheim Gwich'in, Vuntut Gwich'in government, Gwich'in Tribal Council, and the government of the Yukon signed the plan on the traditional territory of the Nacho Nayak First Nation.
Pouring water from the Peel River.
Each pouring water from their region's rivers into a larger glass representing the rivers that flow into the Peel and unity amongst governments. Vice President of the Gwich'in Tribal Council, Jordan Peterson, is proud to be finalizing the plan on behalf of his people.
There was no choice for us when it came to protecting the Peel watershed. This plan is a promise from us to our future generations to protect this region as a rich and pristine place to learn, live, and grow, just as it was left for us.
Under the land use plan, almost 68,000 square kilometers of untouched wilderness in the northeast Yukon is now protected. 83% of the region as conservation land and the remaining 17 being integrated management areas. The plan focuses on sustainable development and provides guidance on 3 main themes: environmental protection, heritage and cultural protection, and economical development. There are still previously staked claims in the region that the government will have to figure out, but now that the plan has been signed, Yukon Premier Sandy Silver says it's time to move forward.
Next steps involve a whole bunch of different things when it comes to outfitters, when it comes to the mineral resources. But the main point today is we have protected some very significant lands here.
I want to show them that country. Tell them about where the animals hang out, where the mineral licks are, and everything. I got all that on my map, my personal map, and I'm going to share that knowledge with some people.
Chris McIntyre, APTN National News, Mayo.
In Ontario, nearly 24 communities in the Anishinaabe Nation will vote on a self-government agreement intended to help First Nations get out from under the Indian Act. Anishinaabe Nation Grand Council Chief Glenn Hare and Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett signed off on the agreement last week. So far, 20 of the 40 communities are slated to vote on the deal by February. Those that ratify the agreement will be able to determine their own citizenship, pass their own laws, and incorporate more language and culture into their governance. Bennett says the decision is now in their hands.
This day signifies the end of the negotiations with an agreement to the satisfaction of the leadership, and then we move into the engagement stage where the leadership will be meeting with communities and prepare them to have the information they need to be able to vote on the agreement in February.
We always want to hear what you have to say. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptn news. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. The BC government says some salmon are managing to pass through the Fraser River despite a massive landslide that was feared would devastate spawning salmon. Crews are shifting rocks to create a natural passage for the fish, along with transporting more than 36,000 salmon to date by helicopter. The province estimates about 6,700 salmon have moved upstream to spawning grounds. A field camp was established last week near the landslide, and a second fish wheel will capture more salmon for transportation upstream.
In Focus is busy getting ready for the new season in October. This season, In Focus will continue to shine a light on what's happening with the child welfare system across this country. We'll tackle topics like the climate crisis, the controversial Trans Mountain Pipeline, and we'll take a look at traditional medicines used in different territories. Here is a sneak peek at a Métis tragedy here in Manitoba, just one of the stories that we're working on now.
This summer marked the 80th anniversary of the removal of the occupants of the Métis community of St. Madeleine near Binscarth, Manitoba.
We'd come home and found that we didn't have a home. Our house had been burned down while we were gone. And it was a sad situation. I was only 4 years old, but I remember seeing my mother crying and my father's shoulders heaving up and down like that. I know he was crying too.
In 1939, hundreds of Métis people lost their land when the provincial and municipal governments took it to open it up for pasture land to help the settler farmers. The people were forced off their land with little or no compensation. The destruction of this community and others like it were not uncommon and are a seemingly forgotten part of Canada's past. In Focus, we'll be exploring the history of St. Madeleine and what happened to the people and to their community. This story and many more coming up this fall on the new season of In Focus.
Looking forward to that. A well-known anti-pipeline activist is heading to jail. That story's coming up after the break.
But first, here's tomorrow's weather. Off to the east coast, we've got 24 in rain in Fredericton, 20 in rain in Halifax. Happy Valley, Goose Bay, sunshine and 25. Kuujjuaq, 20 and sunny. Val-d'Or, 21 and cloudy. 26 for Montreal, sunshine there. 25 and rain in London. 22 and rain in Peterborough. So lookouts rainy and 17. Thunder Bay is 20 and rain. 10 for Thompson and rain. 15s for Puckatawaga and the Paw and rain there. 15 for Gimli and Winnipeg and rain in those communities too. 20 and rain in Swift Current and Saskatoon and North Battleford. 17 in Stony Rapids with a mix of sun and cloud, and 17 and rain in La Ronge.
Welcome back. 11 youth from across the north traveled to the Northwest Territories to meet with climate change experts, elders, and political leaders to talk about and witness the warming north. APTN Charlotte Moore Jacobs joined the youth as they camped on the land and is working on a series that documents their journey. She joins us now from Yellowknife. Charlotte, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about where you went and what you saw?
Absolutely. Yes, for the last 4 days I attended a Young Leaders Climate Change Summit up in the Arctic Circle, where I was camping with 11 youth from Yukon, NWT, and Nunavik, and we were going up to places like Tuktoyaktuk and Inuvik to check on things like melting permafrost and coastline erosion. So we spent the last 4 days meeting with climate change experts, elders, community members, and policymakers, so in hopes that the youth would be able to gain a little bit of knowledge and perspectives and then bring that back to their home communities and inform their home communities and their leadership about the effects of climate change in the Arctic Circle.
And so what type of questions did the youth have about climate change?
Mainly, they had questions for their leadership and how they would be able to get things done if they didn't have a voice at the table. With that, we spent a full day with a breakout session with Jordan Peterson, who is a youth advocate with the Gwich'in Tribal Council up in Inuvik. And each youth, all 11, had to go back to their communities with a project in mind. And a lot of the questions they had surrounded around how to get off of things like diesel, how to properly protect the caribou, and how they could band together in projects, what barriers were there to bring to leadership, and actually, if they weren't getting a response from leadership on these questions, where they could go a step farther, whether that be NGOs in the north or connecting with other influential youth from across coast to coast to coast. So a lot of questions around action of climate change and whether or not legislation is tough enough in all the north, or questions surrounding loss of culture and how to protect culture.
And so, Charlotte, you have a whole series of stories coming. What can we expect to see?
So with this, I was able to interview 8 youth who had very interesting perspectives on climate change and spirituality. Hopefully I'll have some stories on things, linking things like declining caribou herds to being able to make a drum and what the drum means for Creechall people, or like a few different packs on different job avenues. I spoke with one young woman from Yellowknives Dene who is looking to become a geologist. So I'm just sorting through my footage now. Super excited to be able to tie youth perspectives in with what action is actually being taken place, and then bring that series to APTN National News in September.
Well, that sounds like a great series, and I'm sure you've got some amazing visuals to go with it. Charlotte, appreciate you taking some time for us.
Of course. Thank you, Dennis.
Last week, Ottawa announced that construction on the Trans Mountain Pipeline will go ahead within 30 days. Meanwhile, several First Nations have promised to continue to challenge that federally owned project in court, while several other First Nations are working to buy the pipeline themselves. But at the grassroots level, the fight on the ground has led to jail for 2 protesters. You might recall more than 200 people were arrested while demonstrating outside the Trans Mountain Marine Terminal in Burnaby, BC last summer. Well, last week, 2 were sentenced to jail time for breaking an injunction that was meant to keep protesters away from the site. Award-winning Canadian author and poet Rita Wong was one of them. A judge handed her a 1-month jail sentence.
It's blatantly unjust, in my opinion, but you know, I hope it draws attention to people that we live in systems that are unfair and unjust, and that are not prioritized around the things we need to be focused on, which is protecting the land and water. You know, these colonial governments are doing a dismal job, like they're failing in protecting the land and water, and so it's up to the people to do that.
Is it possible for a sign on the side of the road to be a show of respect? That's how one in Southern Ontario is being described. Here's a preview.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamarand. You may be wondering what I'm doing standing so close to the busy 401 here near Cornwall, Ontario. Well, it all has to do with that sign directly across the freeway, and in particular, one word on that sign. You may have already guessed what that could be. But on tomorrow's broadcast, I'm going to have the Mayor of Cornwall and the Grand Chief of the Akwesasne Mohawk Nation tell us more about what it all means.
One of the things is about being welcoming to each other and making sure that the City of Cornwall is projecting a message of welcome in the Mohawk language.
Having our language on their signage is important to us. It signifies that, you know, there's a respect, and that, you know, we are neighbors and we're here to, you know, support one another.
The Toronto Blue Jays Foundation has pitched in to help build a state-of-the-art facility in a Mohawk nation.
That story's coming up after the break, but first, here's a look at the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast. Off to northern Alberta, we've got 18 with a mix of sun and cloud and high level, 20 and mostly sunny in Grand Prairie. Lots of sunshine down south, 23 for Edmonton, 22 for Red Deer and Calgary. 21 in sunshine in Tofino, 23 and sunny in Vancouver. 18 in rain in Fort Nelson and Prince George. Dawson City's at 19 with a mix of sun and cloud. Mayo's 18 and mostly sunny. Lots of sun up in Norman Wells, 19 degrees, 15 and rain in Fort Simpson. Palatec is 12 and cloudy, Colville Lake, sunshine and 16. 13 and sunny in Cambridge Bay, Chesterfield's 10. 9 and rain in Arctic Bay, Clyde River is raining and 10 degrees, and Iqaluit is 13, mostly sunny. Welcome back. Thanks to an $80,000 boost from the Jays Care Foundation, the Mohawk community of Kahnawake inaugurated its first ever regulation baseball field last week. But they're not the only Indigenous community making a fever pitch to the Blue Jays Foundation, hoping to bring the sport closer to home. Lindsay Richardson explains.
After 4 months of construction and years without a space to call their own, this ribbon is all that stands between the Kahnawake Warhawks and a state-of-the-art field of dreams.
3, 2, 1.
Built precisely to Major League specifications, players were so visibly excited for the ribbon cutting that the elders' traditional blessing was cut short.
We know that young people today, they're in a hurry. They want to play. They want to do the things that keep them, that show that they're alive.
Kaya Hemlock's attention went straight to its size.
It's very different because the other field is smaller too, and then the infield's smaller. We would have to play on the grass line mostly.
While other remarks were slightly more specific.
It's more hard to field compared to like other different fields because most fields are like more softer, but when the ball hits the field, it's like bounces right up at you.
With the new field comes the tangible hope of a baseball renaissance in Kahnawake.
This is the biggest we've ever been. Before, it seemed to die off with other sports.
Nice, run it out, run it out, run it out.
Years of gameplay without a regulation home field took its toll on players in every league.
You'd always have to go to another city just to play out of.
In her efforts to modernize the community's parks and rec facilities, Mackenzie White identified a need. And with a successful pitch to the Jays Care Foundation, the charitable arm of Canada's team, the Toronto Blue Jays, she found a solution.
With this option, their playing years have been extended. They have the option now to maybe someone want to go to school for baseball, go playing baseball while they're in school.
And we think that the field is like a classroom, or even better than a classroom.
5 years, $8 million, and 66 projects later, Robert Witchell has seen the benefits of the Foundation's initiatives in communities across Canada, many of them First Nations.
We think baseball's probably the best game in the planet to teach you resiliency. In the last 3 years, we've actually contributed over $1 million in infrastructure to First Nations and other Indigenous communities.
From the Abegwit Mi'kmaq Nation in PEI to the Moose Cree First Nation in Ontario, even as far north as Pond Inlet in Nunavut, this year 6 First Nations and Inuit communities received funds to address different needs involving this common sport.
They have designed programming where you don't win by winning on the field. You actually win by having someone from Chief and Council come and play the game. You win if an elder comes and has a lesson before the game and opens the game. If you host another community and you have a feast or a barbecue or some sort of thing, you get extra points. The best teams at creating community and rebuilding communities are the kids that are winning.
We're hoping to build from the bottom up.
With more victories ahead, at the very least, the team can make a run for home base on a field not too far from home. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Kahnawake, Mohawk Territory.
Great story. A major conference to promote the protection of Indigenous languages around the world wrapped up in Victoria earlier this week. Hali Sutesque, Let the Languages Live, was held as part of the United Nations International Year of Indigenous Languages. APTN's Simone Charland was there.
I could just see the pride. That was acceptance and validation.
That is what knowing your own language means to Perry Bellegarde, National Chief of the AFN. Bellegarde spoke at the opening of the 2019 International Conference on Indigenous Languages in Victoria, BC.
But we want fluency in all of our 60-plus languages across Canada. Gatherings like this conference are important for sharing best practices, listen and learn from each other. Your efforts to ensure that our languages, our Indigenous languages, remain living languages matters immensely.
Tracy Herbert helped organize the event, which had more than 1,000 attendees from over 20 countries.
It was really important to bring our language champions from across British Columbia, Canada, and around the globe to celebrate and to hold each other up. And we also wanted to have an opportunity to share our gifts with each other, because there's some amazing work in language revitalization going on. And often when we get together, this can really spark innovation that we can take home to our communities.
The conference heard that 40% of the estimated 6,700 languages spoken across the globe are in danger of being lost. Despite that gloomy statistic, Lorna Williams from the University of Victoria feels that more Indigenous youth are becoming fluent in their traditional languages.
It's people everywhere who are feeling uplifted by their language and who are willing to do something about keeping their languages alive. This younger generation are people who haven't experienced to the great extent that the other previous generations have of the racism, of the ridicule, of the devaluation, of the denigration of Indigenous languages. You know, young children can learn any language that they're a part of.
And so in March, we affirmed this commitment when we tabled the government's 2019 budget.
Although it was announced in the last federal budget that $300 million will be attached to the Indigenous Language Bill, it is still unclear how the money will be spent.
I think there's a great deal of interest in making sure money goes to grassroots and to the programs that people really know work. But there's young people wanting to make apps. There are all kinds of interesting technological approaches, but I think that most people feel that there's immersion is the way that you get fluent speakers.
But beyond the money, Lorna would like to see a collective effort to protect Indigenous languages from people all across the country.
Each Canadian should be learning and knowing the language that their forebears came to and where they now exist. And that's what I urge every Canadian to do.
Simon Charlin, APTN National News, Victoria.
That was from a language conference that was held back in June. So we're not sure if he wanted a trim, but a wild bear wandered into a new barbershop in northern Alberta.
He terrorized the place. He ruined my station. He went on my front desk. Oh, buddy, it was the wildest thing I've ever seen.
The small bear entered the ironically named Lion's Den barbershop in Slave Lake, Alberta. Police monitored the situation, but no one was injured, and the bear eventually left, but not before causing damage to the store.
Wish there would have been some video to accompany.
Yeah. Like, did he get a haircut? What happened?
It didn't look like he did. Well, that's all the news we have for you for this Monday. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.
I'm Melissa Ridgen, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.